Hello, hello, and welcome to my thought on this very lovely spring day in London. It's a Saturday. Uh, a street cat named Bob died, I believe it was 2 days ago, and his owner, who was James Bowen, was absolutely devastated because he said that the cat saved his life. But I too had a cat that saved my life. And I'm going to tell you about it now. My cat's name was Michael. It was also a ginger cat, and he was beautiful. After I graduated from Stanford University in the 60s, I tried to get a job, and I could not. After my graduation, I lived in San Francisco for 6 months, and I could find nothing. And then I went to New York City to see if I could find a job in journalism, which is what I majored in there because it was the center of the communication industry. I was not interested in film. I was interested in journalism. And for another 6 months, I traveled the streets of New York. I traipsed them trying to find a job, and I could get nothing. And I had impeccable references and a beautiful academic background. But I was a woman, and I was 32 years old. And then I had a complete nervous breakdown. And I called my father, and he came to get me in New York. My father was always rescuing me, he was always bailing me out from something, and he brought me home. At this point, I had used whatever savings I had. Um, I had no more money from the second husband. The second husband gave me alimony for 2 years, so I had no money from him. I had nothing, and I had no job. And my mother informed my father that I was not to come home. She did not want me living with her. So I managed to apply for public housing, and I got a flat at a place called 1232 Crib. And for the first time in my life, I lived with people who were from radically different backgrounds from mine. I don't believe there was a college educated person in my building. I don't believe there was a professional worker of any kind in my building. And this was at a point in my life when I had two master's degrees. And I found those people the most intelligent, the kindest, and the most wonderful people that I had ever lived with. I don't think, other than when I lived in my trailer court, that I ever have had a better neighbor experience. But I was alone. Now, I had been alone because when I went to Stanford, I was also alone. So I was used to living alone. But what I was doing was continuing this job hunt, which had been going on for a year. And it felt pretty hopeless because I had really wanted uh, to get a job in journalism. And I just simply couldn't find a job. And then my friend Rita Herman called me up, and she said, "You're too alone." She said, "I have a kitten for you." And I said, "I don't like cats. I don't like cats." She said, "This isn't a cat. This is a kitten. Just come and look." I went to look, and I'll tell you something, people. You have to have a heart of stone not to fall in love with a kitten. They are without doubt the cutest things you've ever seen in your life, and there were six of them there. And she picked one up, and she said, "This is Karen. She's the K letter, Karen." And I looked at her, and I fell in love. And I took this little ball of orange fluff home. And the next day, I went to our family vet. If anybody's been following any of these stories, my mother had a dog named Junior who bit everybody in the neighborhood, and he was our vet. His name was Dr. Graber, and I liked him. And I took Karen to Dr. Graber, and I said, "I think this is a brand new kitty. I think that she needs shots and she needs something." And he turned Karen over and he looked at Karen and said, "This isn't Karen. This is a boy." He said, "But it's not too late. She's young enough. He's young enough. You can return her if you want a girl." And I said, "Listen, Dr. Reader, if your mother had wanted a girl when you were born, would she have sent you back?" And he said, "You Miller women are all crazy. He said, "You're going to have to neuter this cat because he's going to spray all over everything. But you're going to have to wait a while for that. And I'll give him some shots." And and he said to him, "What are you going to name him?" And I said, "I'm going to call him Michael Mistake." And I brought him home. And suddenly, there was not just me. I had a living thing I had to take care of. I had to feed him. I had to find money. I didn't have it. I didn't have. I must, as I look back, I must have had something because I don't remember going hungry. So I must have had some money in the bank, but there wasn't very much. And I had this beautiful, beautiful little cat. And I used to sit and watch Michael play. And kittens love to play. He had a ball of yarn and he played, and he jumped into the bathtub and he played in the bathtub, and he jumped on my lap and I got to cuddle him. And I had not cuddled a living thing for many years at that point. Um, the husband left in 1960. Well, he left in 1962, and then I was alone. And this would have been 1964, something like that. And because of Michael, I was more determined than ever to find a job. And Michael stayed with me, and Michael was what I hung on to as I finally did find a job back in teaching again, because that was what women did in those days. That was acceptable. I taught university. I taught at a community and technical college. I taught part-time. I was on a part-time salary but I worked full-time, and I supported Michael. And I had many students at that time. One of the students wanted to be a vet, and her name was Mary Pat. And during that time, because I was finally earning money, I went to Ireland to learn to paint because I was teaching art appreciation. I thought if you're teaching art appreciation, you have to learn about painting. So I left Michael for 4 months while I was in Ireland, and Mary Pat, my student, took him. And this cat, which was the gentlest kitten, he was wonderful, Michael. She said that he was so vicious when I wasn't with him that she had to wear gloves when she tried to feed him, and he kept trying to run away. But she did manage to keep him, and at the end of 4 months, he came back, and there he was. And because of Michael, I managed to save enough money to buy us a place to live. And I bought a mobile home, and we moved to a mobile home park. And Michael was with me when I got sick, and Michael was with me when I got the dog David, who walked me back to health. And then I had two children. I had Michael and David. But Michael was always very special. Well, so was David. They all were very, very special. And then it was very hot in my mobile home, and Toledo has very hot summers. And one day I was cooking a meal, which it was unusual because I was anorexic, but I was cooking a meal, and I stepped back and I stepped on Michael, and he bit me, and I got cat scratch fever. And I remember being absolutely terrified that the health department would make me put Michael to sleep. But my doctor, who was also my cousin, said, "No, no, it's all right." And he didn't report him, and I did not have to put him to sleep. And then after, I'm trying to think what it was, it would have been 1978, I finally found a job. All that time I found a job in journalism, which is what I wanted. Um, and by that time I had been in the hospital. I had David, but I also had Michael. And I bundled, when I got the job in Oklahoma City, I took David and Michael and Cindy. Then I had Cindy, my little poodle, and Eileen, another little cat. So I had 4 children by that time. And I took them to Oklahoma City. And while I was in Oklahoma City, David ran away and never came back. And I am convinced that David was killed by a train that ran behind the house. Because he knew the house, he knew, and he would have come home. I was his mommy. And while I was recovering from the loss of David, Michael lost control of his back legs, and I knew that I had to put him to sleep. He couldn't drag himself. What he would do is he would drag himself to the litter and just sit there, and I knew I had to put him to sleep. And I picked up this cat, which was the first living thing that I had had to love, um, and was my first um, success because I managed to keep him alive and I managed to support him. He was my first success in almost 40 years, over 40 years. Um, and I was in Oklahoma City, and I had to take him and put him to sleep. And I remember driving to the vet and getting out of the car, and I had to cross a 4-lane highway. I stood and I stood in the middle of this highway with this cat who died in my arms. Then he died, and I was holding this dead cat in my arms, and crying my eyes out. And the cars were going left and right, and going left all around me. And then I took him into the vet, and they kept the body, and I left and came home. And when I read about James Bowen's A Sense of Loss, I understand so completely a loss of an animal, because it's not like with a human, which is a terrible loss, but it's not the same, because you can bury a human, you can have a funeral for a human, and of course you could for a dog too, and a cat, but I could not afford anything like that. Mine were uh, disposed of at a veterinarian's office. And when I look back, I realize that the thing that kept me alive and that kept me moving was my cat. His name was Michael. And I've never, ever deprecated the importance of a pet in someone's life. I live now in a building where they will not allow us to have a dog. They will let us have cats, but I live on the third floor, and I believe that a cat should be able to get outside. So I do not have pets again, and we have this lockdown, which I find very difficult because there is no living thing in this place except me. So I'm trying to think of a resolution for this story, and the only resolution I can tell you is that now I am older and wiser, and I realize that nothing really saved my life but me. And thank you so much for joining me for my thought. It was not a very cheerful thought, but I promise it'll be more cheerful tomorrow.